When I returned from my trip earlier, I caught my wife cheating with my best friend. She wanted to take my farm from me. Then I took a DNA test. The son is not mine, and my name is Thomas Bennett, and for most of my life, I thought I had it all figured out. I'm 46 years old, a successful farmer with more land than I know what to do with. I was born and raised in Nebraska, in a small town not far from Kearney. That's where I built my life, piece by piece, acre by acre. I'm not just some guy with a tractor. No, I own Bennett Acres, a sprawling 1,500-acre farm that's the envy of every farmer in the state. I also own land in Iowa and Missouri. That's right, 3 states, hundreds of acres, and more than enough income to live comfortably. My main farm, the one in Nebraska, is where I built my house. It's a big place, 8 bedrooms, expansive lawns, the works. It's the kind of home that says you've made it. People around here respect me. I've been doing this long enough that I've earned it. I wake up before sunrise, work until my hands ache, and I don't complain about it. That's just the way it is when you're running a farm, especially one the size of mine. But no one tells you that all that work can take its toll. My wife, Margaret, passed away 5 years ago. A sudden aneurysm. She was gone before I could even process it. We've been married for 15 years. Margaret had been the steady hand behind my success. While I worked the fields and ran the farm, she kept everything at home together. Losing her left a hole in my life, one that I wasn't sure I'd ever fill. For a while, I poured myself into my work. It was the only thing I knew how to do, really. The farm became my world, my distraction from the grief. But as the years passed, I started to feel like something was missing. I didn't want to be alone for the rest of my life. It was a crisp November day in 2019 when I met Amanda Patterson. Mandy, as she liked to be called, was 34 years old, divorced, and living in Denver, Colorado. I met her at a farmers' conference in Kansas City. She wasn't a farmer, which was what first caught my attention. Most of the women I'd met over the years had grown up in farming families, but Mandy was a financial advisor. Smart, sharp, and with a look in her eyes that told me she was no stranger to tough times. She had a son, Ethan, who was 14 at the time. Mandy had been raising him on her own after her divorce. I don't know what it was, but something about her drew me in. We spent hours talking at the conference about everything from work to life, and before I knew it, I found myself wanting to know more about her. It didn't take long for things to move forward. By May 2020, we were married. It was a small, quiet ceremony on my farm in Nebraska. Mandy and Ethan moved in, and it felt like I'd found a second chance at life. I'd never thought I'd get married again, not after everything that had happened. But Mandy had a way of making everything feel new. The first year was bliss. Mandy adapted to farm life quicker than I expected. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, and she even started helping with some of the financial aspects of running the farms. Ethan, though a typical teenager, gradually warmed up to me. I made an effort to bond with him, showing him the ropes around the farm, taking him fishing, and doing the things that a father and son might do. But I didn't stay put for long. I couldn't. The farm demanded constant attention, and I was always on the move. In October 2020, I had to travel to Canada for the Ontario Farmers Market. It's a big event, lasting a week, from October 2nd to the 8th. I'd gone before, and I knew it was important for the farm's business. So, I packed my bags, kissed Mandy goodbye, and headed north. When I got back, things seemed normal enough. But 9 months later, in July 2021, our son, Matthew, was born. I was over the moon. Having a son was something I'd always wanted, someone to carry on the Bennett name, to inherit the land, and continue the work I'd started. Life was good. At least, I thought it was. 7 months later, in February 2022, I came back from a business trip earlier than expected. I was supposed to be in Missouri for a couple more days, but the weather turned bad, and I decided to head home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks: Mark's car. Mark Hudson had been a friend of mine for years, practically family. He'd been there through thick and thin, helping me with everything from farm repairs to personal struggles. Seeing his car at my house, though, something felt wrong. I tried to push the feeling aside. Maybe he was just visiting Mandy, dropping off some paperwork, or stopping by for a quick chat. But as I walked up to the front door, The pit in my stomach grew. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I called out, but no one answered. My boots thudded against the hardwood floors as I made my way up the stairs toward the bedroom. The door was half open, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sounds of two people together. My blood ran cold, but I pushed open the door anyway. There they were, Mandy and Mark, tangled in the sheets. I stood there, frozen, watching them. They didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in what they were doing. But when Mandy's eyes finally locked on mine, she didn't look ashamed. No, she smirked. Well, looks like the sucker came home early, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Guess you finally figured out that you don't know a damn thing about satisfying a woman. Her words hit me like a brick. I don't remember pulling out my phone, but the next thing I knew, I was recording the whole thing. I wanted proof, something to hold on to, because I knew no one would believe me if I told them what I'd just seen. Mark scrambled out of the bed, grabbing his clothes, mumbling apologies that meant nothing. I didn't hit him. I didn't yell. I didn't even confront Mandy. I just stood there, filming them, watching as my life fell apart in front of me. When Mark finally left, I turned to Mandy, who didn't seem the least bit concerned. You're a joke, Tom, she said, pulling the sheets up around her. You've always been so busy with your farms, with your precious land. You never had time for me. I didn't say a word. I just turned around, walked out of the room, and headed for the door. But as I left, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let Mandy think she'd won. No, I was going to get even. I just needed time to figure out how. So, I told her I needed space. I told her I was going to stay at my farm in Iowa for a while, to clear my head. She agreed without a second thought, probably thinking I'd just disappear quietly. But I had other plans. Plans she'd never see coming. Moving to my farm in Iowa was supposed to give me clarity. I needed space to think, away from the life I'd built in Nebraska, away from Amanda and all the lies. The farm in Iowa wasn't as large as my main operation in Nebraska, but it was still impressive, 850 acres of soybeans and corn just outside of Des Moines, in a town called Indianola. It was quieter here, less attention on me, and that was what I needed. The drive from Kearney to Indianola took me about 4 hours. I left without telling Amanda much. I simply told her that I needed time to process things and figure out the future. She barely reacted, which made my decision feel even more necessary. As I pulled into the long driveway of the Iowa farm, I could feel the weight of everything on my shoulders, but I wasn't about to let it break me. First things first, I needed to gather evidence. Amanda and Mark had been reckless, sure, but I had to be smarter. I didn't want a messy confrontation. If I was going to take this to court, I needed something solid. I hired a private investigator in Des Moines. His name was David Callahan, an ex-cop turned PI who specialized in cases like mine. We met at a small diner just off I-80. David was a tall, wiry guy in his late 50s, with a gruff voice and a no-nonsense attitude. I like that about him. You've got a tough situation on your hands, Mr. Bennett, David said, stirring his coffee. But I've dealt with worse. We'll get the evidence you need. Just give me time. I handed him the details, the dates I'd been gone, the times I suspected Amanda had been with Mark. He scribbled everything down in a small notebook, nodding along as I spoke. Anything else I should know? He asked, flipping to a fresh page. I suspect there's more, I said, taking a breath. I think she's trying to take control of part of my business, maybe some of the property too. I need to know what she's been doing behind my back. David raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He just nodded, wrote down more notes, and assured me he'd dig deep. Over the next few weeks, I started preparing for what I knew would be a long battle. I met with a lawyer in Des Moines, Mary Ellen Sharp, one of the top family lawyers in the state. She had a reputation for being tough, the kind of person who didn't back down from a fight. Her office was in a tall building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Divorce is tricky, Thomas, she said, leaning back in her leather chair, especially when there's this much money and property involved. You need to protect your assets now, before things get ugly. We spent hours going over everything. The farm in Nebraska, the properties in Iowa and Missouri, the business interests, and all the real estate holdings. It turned out Amanda had already started taking steps. Mary Ellen had pulled up records showing that Amanda had secretly registered joint rights to a portion of my business and real estate. I'd been too trusting, letting her handle parts of the farm's finances after we got married. She'd used that trust to her advantage, slipping her name onto documents without me knowing. "She's playing the long game," Mary Ellen said, tapping her fingers on the edge of her desk. "If you don't act fast, she could walk away with a large chunk of your business." I wasn't going to let that happen. I worked too hard for everything I had. Margaret and I had built this life together, and I wasn't about to let someone like Amanda take it from me. So, I started moving assets. Quietly, of course. With Mary Ellen's help, I set up a trust, transferring some shares of the business to trustees who I could trust, old friends from the farming world, people who had no connections to Amanda. It was a way to protect the core of my estate, a safety net in case things went sideways. At the same time, I ordered a full audit of the business. I needed to know exactly what Amanda had done, how deep her involvement went. The more I learned, the more betrayed I felt. She'd been siphoning money into separate accounts, small amounts that I hadn't noticed, but it added up. She was planning for a future without me, and I needed to make sure she wouldn't get away with it. While all of this was happening, a dark thought kept gnawing at the back of my mind. Matthew. He was only 7 months old, born just 9 months after I returned from that trip to Ontario. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might not be mine. I hadn't wanted to think about it. Matthew was my son, or at least that's what I'd been telling myself. But after what I'd seen with Amanda and Mark, I couldn't ignore the possibility anymore. So, I ordered a DNA test. It felt wrong, like I was betraying my own flesh and blood, but I had to know. I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. The test results would take a few weeks, but in the meantime, I kept myself busy, throwing everything I had into the farm. The days in Iowa passed slowly. I'd wake up early, check on the fields, go through the books, and then spend my afternoons with David or Mary Ellen, preparing for the inevitable showdown with Amanda. David had uncovered plenty. Pictures of her meeting Mark in secret, phone records showing hours of calls between them, emails that made my stomach turn. It was all adding up. One day, while sitting in the farm office, the DNA test results arrived in my inbox. My hands trembled as I clicked the link, and as the page loaded, I felt like my heart stopped. The results were clear. Matthew was not my son. The room felt like it was spinning. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, disbelief. How long had Amanda been deceiving me? How many lies had she told? I thought back to the day Matthew was born, the joy I'd felt, the pride. All of it was a lie. I called David and Mary Ellen, needing to share the news, needing to hear someone else's voice. Mary Ellen, always calm and collected, told me this could strengthen my case, but her words didn't bring any comfort. How could they? I'd spent the last 7 months raising a child that wasn't mine, and now I had to figure out what to do with that knowledge. I didn't confront Amanda right away. Instead, I let the information sit with me, simmering. I couldn't make any rash moves. Not yet. I needed to finish the plan, protect the rest of my assets, and ensure that when I did finally confront her, I'd have all the power in my hands. The farm in Iowa became my refuge, my fortress of solitude where I could plot and plan. Every time I thought about going back to Nebraska, about facing Amanda, I stopped myself. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I began reaching out to people I trusted, old farming colleagues, business partners, anyone who might be able to help me protect what was left of my legacy. I told them what was happening, and slowly but surely, I began to move more assets out of Amanda's reach. It wasn't easy. Amanda had woven herself into my life in ways I hadn't even realized. But I was determined. I wasn't going to let her take any more from me. Not my land, not my business, and certainly not my future. As the weeks passed, the pieces of the plan started falling into place. I had transferred a significant portion of my business to the trust, set up layers of protection around my remaining assets, and gathered enough evidence to take Amanda to court. But there was one thing I couldn't protect: my heart. Despite everything, despite the lies and betrayal, part of me still wanted to believe that Amanda had once loved me, that we'd had something real, even if it had all fallen apart. But as I stood there in my office, staring at the DNA results again, I knew that whatever love had existed between us was gone. Matthew wasn't mine, and soon enough, neither would Amanda be. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Moving to Iowa had given me the space I needed to protect what was mine. I thought I was in control, that I had finally gotten ahead of Amanda and her schemes. But I underestimated her. While I was busy shuffling assets and preparing my next move, Amanda had been one step ahead. It started when I received a notice from the Polk County Courthouse in Des Moines. Amanda had filed a lawsuit against me, claiming rights to a portion of my land and business. She wasn't playing games anymore. She was coming for everything. The claim stated that Amanda had been integrally involved in the management of Bennett Acres, and that her financial contributions entitled her to a share of the farm's assets, including parts of the land. I knew this was her way of getting back at me. She'd found out about the trust and the asset transfers. I didn't know how, but she had connections in financial institutions, probably some of the bankers she worked with when she was still a financial advisor in Denver. I drove back to Kearney that same day. It was February 19th, 2022, a freezing Saturday morning. The familiar sight of my house, the 8-bedroom mansion that I'd built brick by brick, felt different this time. It no longer felt like home. I hadn't seen Amanda or Matthew in weeks, but now I'd have to confront her. I walked in, expecting some kind of fight, but Amanda wasn't even there. Instead, I found Ethan, Amanda's 14-year-old son, sitting on the couch, playing a video game. He barely looked up when I came in. I asked him where his mother was. "She's at the lawyer's office," Ethan said, without missing a beat. "Said she's got a lot of stuff to handle." I nodded and went upstairs to my office, where I immediately called Mary Ellen, my lawyer in Des Moines. She answered on the second ring. "She's coming for you, Tom," Mary Ellen said, her voice calm but serious. "She's filed a claim on the land in Nebraska, and she's using your history with the farm as leverage." "What do you mean, my history?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. "She's pulling up everything she can. Old business losses, financial difficulties you had in the early 2000s when the market crashed. She's saying that she helped save Bennett Acres from bankruptcy, and because of that, she deserves a stake." I slammed my hand on the desk, rattling the stack of papers sitting next to my computer. I hadn't been bankrupt, not exactly, but the early 2000s had been rough. Corn prices plummeted, and I'd taken out some hefty loans to keep things afloat. Margaret had been the one who helped me dig my way out. It was our struggle, and we'd gotten through it together. Amanda had nothing to do with it. She didn't even come into the picture until 2019, well after those debts were cleared. "This is bullshit," I muttered, pacing around the room. "She's lying." Mary Ellen sighed on the other end of the line. "It's not just about the truth, Tom. It's about what she can prove, and unfortunately, she's got documents showing her involvement in the financial side of things, especially over the last couple of years." I thought back to all the times I'd let Amanda handle the farm's finances, thinking it was harmless. She was good with numbers, better than me. I had trusted her, let her in too close. And now, she was using that trust to tear me down. The trial started on March 4th, 2022, in Kearney's District Court. I walked into the courthouse, my boots clacking against the polished floors, feeling the weight of years of hard work on my shoulders. Amanda was already there, sitting at a table with her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Christine Bennett, no relation. Amanda looked calm, collected, like she had all the power in the world. She didn't even glance in my direction when I took my seat next to Mary Ellen. Instead, she kept her gaze forward, her fingers idly tapping the table in front of her. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Amanda wasn't just going after the land and business. She was trying to tarnish everything I had built. Her lawyer pulled out financial records from 2002, showing the significant debts I'd incurred when the farm had nearly gone under. Christine made it seem like I was a reckless businessman, someone who couldn't manage his own affairs without help. "Mr. Bennett's history with his farm shows a pattern of financial mismanagement," Christine said, standing in front of the judge. It wasn't until Mrs. Amanda Bennett stepped in that the farm saw significant financial stability. Her contributions are undeniable, and she is entitled to a portion of the assets. My jaw clenched. I wanted to shout, to argue that Amanda hadn't been there for any of the hard years. But Mary Ellen had warned me not to speak unless absolutely necessary. "Stay calm," she whispered, sensing my frustration. "Let me handle it." Mary Ellen was a pro. When it was her turn to speak, she systematically dismantled Amanda's claims, showing that while Amanda may have handled some financial matters in recent years, her involvement was minimal compared to the overall operation of Bennett Acres. But the worst came when Amanda's lawyer brought up my family history. No one in the courtroom, except for me and Mary Ellen, knew what was coming. Christine had dug deep into things I thought were long buried. "Mr. Bennett's personal and financial struggles are not new," she said, pacing in front of the jury. "There are unresolved issues dating back to the 1990s, including a bitter family dispute over land that nearly tore the Bennett family apart." My throat tightened. That was true, but I hadn't expected it to come up here. In 1997, my father and I had gotten into a nasty fight over a piece of land he'd promised me but then sold to a developer at the last minute. We hadn't spoken for years afterward, and when he passed in 2006, I was left to deal with the fallout. Christine didn't stop there. She went on to talk about how the family feud had resulted in my estranged brother, Charles, filing a lawsuit against me, claiming I had manipulated our father into leaving me a larger share of the inheritance. The lawsuit had been settled quietly, out of court, but the damage had been done. Now, all of that was being dragged back into the spotlight, and I could see the way the jury was reacting. Amanda's lawyer was painting a picture of me as a man who had barely held onto his land, who had clawed his way to success through deception and family strife. I could feel the ground slipping out from under me, but I wasn't going to let Amanda win. Not after everything she'd done. When the DNA results came in and confirmed that Matthew wasn't my son, I knew I had to act decisively. I had waited long enough. The night after the second day of the trial, I went back to the house in Kearney. It was late, almost midnight, when I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark, except for a single light in the kitchen. Amanda was sitting at the table, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look surprised to see me. "I suppose you're here to yell at me about the trial," she said, not bothering to look up. I didn't yell. I just stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling the anger boil under my skin. "Matthew's not mine," I said, my voice low but steady. Amanda didn't flinch. She took another sip of her wine and shrugged. "So what? You've been a good father to him. That's what matters." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "Is that what you think?" I asked. "That it doesn't matter? That lying to me about my own son isn't a big deal?" She finally looked up, her expression calm, almost bored. "He is your son, Tom. Maybe not by blood, but you've raised him since the day he was born. You're the only father he knows. That's not going to change just because of some DNA test." I shook my head. "You don't get it. I've spent 7 months thinking Matthew was mine, thinking I had a future with him. And now I find out it was all a lie." "How long have you been lying to me, Amanda?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, set her glass on the table, and walked toward the stairs. "It doesn't matter, Tom. What's done is done. You're not going to walk away from this without losing something. You know that, right?" I watched her walk up the stairs, feeling the weight of her words. She was right about one thing. I wasn't walking away from this unscathed, but I wasn't going to lose everything either. The next morning, I met with Mary Ellen again, going over our strategy. The DNA test had changed everything. I could use it to weaken Amanda's position, to show that she had deceived me from the start. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about exposing the truth, about Matthew, about the lies, about everything Amanda had tried to take from me. The trial continued for another 2 weeks, and each day, the tension between us grew. But I knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day Mark Hudson went missing was one I won't forget anytime soon. It was March 17th, 2022. The trial was still ongoing, with Amanda fighting tooth and nail to take what she could from me. The courtroom battles had consumed my every waking thought. But when the news hit that Mark hadn't shown up to work, everything changed. Mark wasn't just a casual acquaintance. He had been one of my oldest friends, the man who had stood by my side through some of the hardest years of my life. We grew up together in Kearney, Nebraska, playing baseball in the summers and working on farms in high school. He was there when Margaret died, and he was there when I remarried Amanda. I trusted him more than most, and that was what made his betrayal cut so deep. But now he was gone. It started small. He didn't show up to his job at the feed store just outside of Hastings, a town about 45 minutes from Kearney. His wife, Laura, called the police that evening when he didn't come home. The last time anyone had seen him was at a bar in Grand Island 2 days earlier, on the night of March 15th. I got the call from the sheriff's office on the 18th. Deputy Scott Harmon, a stocky man in his early 40s who had been part of the Kearney police force for over a decade, pulled up to my house in the late afternoon. I was in the middle of going over some paperwork when I saw his cruiser pull into the long driveway. "Tom," he said, getting out of the car. "We need to talk." I walked out onto the porch, bracing myself for bad news. "What's this about, Scott?" "It's about Mark. He's missing." I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to shrug it off, to tell Scott that Mark had probably taken off somewhere to clear his head. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Mark wasn't the type to disappear without a word. "What do you mean, missing?" I finally asked. "No one's seen him since the 15th, Scott said, adjusting his hat. "His wife reported him missing yesterday. We're looking into it, but I thought you should know." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My gut twisted as Scott shifted uncomfortably on the porch. "Tom, I've known you a long time, so I'm going to be straight with you. With everything going on, the divorce, the trial, the DNA test, people are talking. Folks around town think there's more to this than just a missing person case. They think you might have, you know." He didn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need him to. The implication was clear. People thought I had something to do with Mark's disappearance. The rumors were already spreading. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, shaking my head. "You think I did something to Mark?" Scott held up his hands defensively. "I didn't say that, Tom. But you've got a motive, at least in the eyes of the town. He was sleeping with your wife. You're in the middle of a nasty divorce. And now Mark's gone. You've got to see how it looks." I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my anger in check. "I didn't do anything to him." "Yeah, he screwed me over, but I'm not some kind of criminal." Scott sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I just wanted to give you a heads up. The investigation is still in the early stages, but I'd keep your nose clean for now. Stay out of trouble." With that, he got back into his cruiser and left, leaving me standing there on the porch, staring out over the fields. I had thought the worst of my troubles would come from Amanda and the trial. But now I had something even bigger hanging over my head. A missing friend and the suspicion of half the town. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, whispers, and headlines. It didn't take long for the local papers to get a hold of the story. The Kearney Hub ran a piece titled "Local Farmer's Friend Goes Missing Amidst Divorce Drama," and from there, the gossip spread like wildfire. I couldn't walk into town without people giving me sideways looks, like they were trying to decide if I was capable of murder. I didn't have to imagine what people were saying behind my back. I heard it every time I stopped by the co-op or grabbed supplies from the feed store. "He always seemed like a decent guy, but you never know," one old man said, leaning on the counter as I walked past. "You think he did it?" a woman whispered to her friend. "He's been through a lot. Maybe it pushed him over the edge." It was like the whole town had turned on me overnight. My reputation, once solid as the land I'd built my life on, was crumbling. People I'd known for decades were now treating me like a suspect in a crime I didn't commit. The stress of the trial, the weight of Amanda's lies, and now this. It was all pressing down on me like a load of bricks. On the evening of March 24th, about a week after Mark's disappearance, something unexpected happened. I was at the farm in Iowa, trying to keep myself busy by going over some contracts for the upcoming planting season. The phone rang, and when I picked it up, I heard Ethan's voice on the other end. "Tom?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Ethan, what's going on? Why are you calling?" I don't know how to say this," he stammered, "but I think my mom knows something about Mark." I sat up straight in my chair, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I heard her talking on the phone yesterday," Ethan said. "She was talking to someone about the investigation. She said something about how she didn't expect it to go this far, and that she thought it would blow over by now. I don't know what she meant, but it didn't sound right." I didn't say anything at first, my mind reeling. Ethan had never been one to get involved in the mess between his mother and me. He usually kept his head down, focusing on school and staying out of trouble. But now he was reaching out, and it felt like he was trying to help. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Ethan hesitated. Because I don't think you did anything to Mark. I've known you for a while now, and you're not the kind of person to, hurt someone. But I'm starting to think my mom might be hiding something. She's been acting weird lately, and I don't trust her. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. You think Amanda's involved? I don't know, Ethan said, his voice small. But something's off. I can feel it. Over the next few days, Ethan and I stayed in touch, meeting in secret at a diner just outside of Grand Island. It was a small, out-of-the-way place called the Windmill Cafe, where no one knew us and we could talk without worrying about being seen. Ethan started telling me more about the things he had overheard. Amanda's late-night phone calls, her sudden trips to Lincoln and Omaha, her nervous behavior around the house. She's hiding something, Ethan said, his brow furrowed as he stirred his milkshake. I'm sure of it. The more Ethan told me, the more convinced I became that Amanda knew more about Mark's disappearance than she was letting on. But I couldn't go to the police with nothing but suspicion. I needed proof. And that's when Ethan came up with an idea. She keeps a lot of files in her office, he said. I've seen her going through them late at night. If I can get in there, maybe I can find something. You sure about this? I asked, feeling a knot of guilt. Ethan was just a kid, and I didn't want him to get caught up in something this dangerous. But at the same time, he was the only one who had any access to Amanda's private life. Ethan nodded, determination in his eyes. I'll be careful. A few nights later, Ethan slipped into Amanda's home office while she was out meeting with her lawyer in Lincoln. It was a risky move, but he managed to find something. A series of emails between Amanda and someone named Jeffrey Carr. The emails were vague, but they mentioned a large sum of money and a distraction that needed to be handled. When Ethan showed me the emails, I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know who Jeffrey Carr was, but the way Amanda talked about him, it was clear they were involved in something shady. With this new information, I knew I had to act fast. I took the emails to Mary Ellen the next day, showing her everything Ethan had uncovered. She was as shocked as I was, but she didn't waste any time. She contacted the authorities, and within a few days, the investigation had shifted focus. Now, Amanda was under scrutiny, and I was no longer the prime suspect. But the damage had already been done. My reputation in Kearney was in tatters. The rumors about me had spread far and wide, and even though I was no longer the main suspect, people still looked at me with suspicion. My business partners in Nebraska were distancing themselves, hesitant to be associated with a man involved in such a scandal. And then there was Mark. Despite everything, he was still missing, and no one knew where he was or what had happened to him. The police had searched the area, questioned everyone who had last seen him, but they were coming up empty-handed. It was like he had vanished into thin air. As the days dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Amanda was still out there, playing her game, and I had no idea what her next move would be. But one thing was certain, Ethan was on my side, and together, we were going to find out the truth. The investigation into Mark Hudson's disappearance had turned my world upside down. Kearney wasn't a big town, and news spread fast. Everywhere I went, I could feel people staring, whispering behind my back, wondering if I had done something to him. The police were still circling around me, even if Amanda was under suspicion now, too. And while the gossip hurt, I knew there was something much bigger at play, something more than just an affair gone wrong. But in the midst of all this chaos, the one person I hadn't expected to stand by me was Ethan. He was just 14, Amanda's son from her first marriage, and I'd always thought he'd side with his mother in all of this. But as the weeks passed, he kept reaching out, and we talked more than we ever had when I was married to Amanda. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was growing up fast, and it was clear he had started to understand who his mother really was. It was early April when Ethan and I met again at the Windmill Cafe just outside Grand Island, the same diner where we'd had our secret meetings before. He sat across from me in a corner booth, his hair falling into his eyes as he stirred his soda absent-mindedly. He was quieter than usual that evening, and I could tell he had something big on his mind. Tom, he finally said, looking up at me. I found something else. Something about my mom and Mark. I don't know what to do with it. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice calm. What did you find, Ethan? Ethan glanced around, making sure no one was listening before he pulled out a small notebook from his backpack. He slid it across the table, and when I opened it, I saw a series of handwritten notes, email printouts, and bank account numbers. The name Jeffrey Carr appeared several times, along with financial transactions I didn't recognize. I've been going through Mom's office again, Ethan explained. She's been talking to this guy, Jeffrey Carr, for a while. I didn't know who he was, but I did some digging, and I think he's part of something big. Mark was involved, too. My stomach clenched. Involved in what? Financial fraud, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. They've been moving money around through different accounts, hiding it in fake businesses, shell companies. There are transactions going back at least 2 years, but I think it's been happening for longer than that. Mom and Mark were in on it together. I sat back, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. Amanda had been siphoning money from the business, from our farms, for years. And Mark, my oldest friend, had helped her do it. It wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about something much deeper and more dangerous. They had been stealing from me, from my legacy, and now they were both tangled up in something far worse than I'd imagined. Do you think this has something to do with Mark's disappearance? I asked. Ethan nodded slowly. I do. I think he was getting in too deep, maybe trying to pull out, and something happened. I don't know if Mom had anything to do with it, but I wouldn't put it past her. She's not the person you think she is, Tom. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but at the same time, it made sense. Amanda had always been calculated, always one step ahead. This wasn't just about revenge or spite. She had been planning this for a long time, and now everything was unraveling. Over the next few days, Ethan and I worked together in secret. He was cautious, sneaking into Amanda's office whenever she was away in Lincoln or Omaha. The emails he found painted a clearer picture of what had been happening behind my back. Jeffrey Carr, a shadowy figure in the business world, had been helping Amanda and Mark launder money through a series of fake businesses. They had used shell companies to hide the money, transferring it to offshore accounts under different names. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Ethan found emails between Mark and Amanda discussing how to cover their tracks, talking about when they could finally cash out and leave town for good. It wasn't just fraud. It was a full-blown conspiracy. By mid-April, Ethan had gathered enough evidence to fill a folder. I took everything to Mary Ellen in Des Moines. She went over it meticulously, her brow furrowed as she sifted through the documents. This is serious, she said, leaning back in her chair. If this is true, Amanda and Mark could face federal charges for financial fraud and embezzlement. You could be looking at a way to not only clear your name, but take them both down for good. I don't care about taking them down, I said, though my voice betrayed me. I just want to make sure they don't take everything from me. I've already lost enough. Mary Ellen tapped her pen against the desk. We need to be careful, Tom. This is bigger than just a divorce now. If we go to the authorities with this, it could open up a whole new investigation. You need to be ready for what comes next. I nodded, but I wasn't ready, not for what happened next. A week later, on April 22nd, the police came knocking again. This time it wasn't Scott Harmon. It was Detective Brenda Kingsley from the Nebraska State Patrol. She was sharp, mid-40s, with short black hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She had a reputation for getting results, and I knew things had escalated. Mr. Bennett, she said as she stood on my porch, her badge glinting in the late afternoon sun. We need to talk about Mark Hudson. I invited her in, trying to keep my nerves in check. Brenda sat at my kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in front of her as she asked questions about the last time I'd seen Mark, about his relationship with Amanda, and whether I knew anything about his disappearance. I told her everything I knew about the affair, the trial, and the financial documents Ethan and I had uncovered. When I mentioned the fraud, Brenda's eyes narrowed. You're telling me Amanda and Mark were involved in financial crimes together? I'm not just telling you, I said, handing her the folder Mary Ellen had helped me put together. I've got proof. Brenda flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. "This changes things," she finally said. "We'll need to look into this further. But I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Bennett. The fact that you've brought this to us doesn't erase the fact that you're still a person of interest in Mark's disappearance. There are people who think you had a motive to make him disappear." "I didn't do anything to Mark," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I don't know where he is, and I want to find him as much as anyone else. But I do know that Amanda has been hiding things. She's dangerous." Brenda nodded, her eyes still on the papers. "We'll look into it. But until we get more information, I suggest you keep a low profile. The last thing you need is more suspicion on you." The days dragged on, and the investigation into Mark's disappearance hit a dead end. The police couldn't find any leads, and it was like Mark had vanished into thin air. The rumors in Kearney continued to swirl, and every time I walked into town, I could feel the weight of people's eyes on me. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had to keep pushing forward, had to stay focused on protecting what was left of my life. Ethan kept helping me, sneaking more information out of Amanda's office and keeping me updated on her every move. He was growing up fast, and I could see the strain this was putting on him. But he never wavered, never backed down. He wanted to help, and for that, I was grateful. One night, we sat in my truck just outside of town, going over the latest batch of emails Ethan had managed to get his hands on. He had found messages between Amanda and Jeffrey Carr discussing plans to move large sums of money offshore, using a fake real estate deal in Omaha as a cover. "They're planning to disappear," Ethan said, his voice low. "As soon as the trial is over, they're going to leave the country." I clenched my fists, the anger rising in my chest. They had already taken so much from me: my trust, my reputation, my land, and now they were planning to vanish with the money they'd stolen. I couldn't let that happen. By the time the trial resumed in early May, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. The evidence Ethan had uncovered was starting to make its way into the proceedings, and Amanda was starting to feel the heat. She was no longer the calm, collected woman I had seen at the beginning of all this. Now, she was defensive, her eyes darting nervously as her lawyer tried to downplay the financial documents. But the truth was out there now, and there was no going back. I looked over at Ethan, sitting in the back of the courtroom, and gave him a small nod. He had done more for me than I ever could have imagined, and I knew that, no matter what happened, I wasn't in this fight alone. Amanda might have been able to manipulate me once, but with Ethan by my side, I was finally starting to take control. And whatever came next, I was ready for it. May 17th, 2022. That date will stay with me forever. It was the final day of the trial, and the tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. I had been waiting for this day for months, waiting for the chance to finally clear my name and expose Amanda for what she had done. My lawyer, Mary Ellen Sharp, had prepared relentlessly, leaving no stone unturned. But even with all the evidence we had gathered, there was always a shadow of doubt in my mind. Would it be enough? The courthouse was in downtown Kearney, Nebraska, a red brick building that had seen its share of high-profile cases over the years, but nothing quite like this. The morning air was cool as I parked my truck a block away, walking through the square to the courthouse steps. People were already gathering, locals who had followed the story from the beginning. They whispered and pointed as I passed, and I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see how this would all end. Amanda arrived shortly after I did, stepping out of a sleek black car driven by her lawyer, Christine Bennett. Amanda looked different that day, her usual composure cracked. There were bags under her eyes, and her once impeccable hair was slightly disheveled. She knew what was coming. As I entered the courtroom, I saw Ethan sitting in the back row, just as he had been for the past few weeks. He gave me a small nod, his expression tense but supportive. He had done so much to help me, and now it was time to bring everything to light. The trial began promptly at 9 a.m. Judge Timothy Hayes, an older man with a stern face and graying hair, presided over the case. He had been tough but fair throughout the proceedings, giving both sides room to argue their cases, but I could tell he had little patience for theatrics. This was the day for facts, for evidence, for the truth. Mary Ellen started with a brief opening statement, summarizing what had brought us here. Amanda's infidelity, the DNA test proving that Matthew wasn't my son, and the mountain of financial evidence showing the fraud she and Mark had committed. She was calm, collected, and methodical, just like she always was. As we have already presented, Mary Ellen said, addressing the judge, my client has been deceived for years. Not only has his personal life been manipulated, but his business, his very livelihood, has been attacked by Amanda Bennett and her accomplice, Mark Hudson. Today, we will prove beyond a doubt that this was a calculated effort to defraud Mr. Bennett, and we will show the court the full extent of Amanda Bennett's involvement. Christine Bennett, representing Amanda, tried to maintain her usual confidence, but I could see her struggling. They didn't have much of a defense left, not after what Ethan and I had uncovered. Christine made a few points about Amanda's supposed involvement in the farm's management, trying to frame her as an innocent victim who had simply helped me navigate difficult financial decisions. But it wasn't enough. The evidence spoke for itself. The first big moment of the day came when Mary Ellen presented the DNA test results. She called an expert witness, Dr. Patricia Reynolds, who explained in precise, clinical terms how the test had been conducted and how it had conclusively shown that Matthew was not my biological son. Based on the analysis of the genetic markers, Dr. Reynolds said, flipping through her report, there is a 0% chance that Mr. Bennett is the father of Matthew Bennett. The probability that another man is the biological father is overwhelming. Amanda sat stone-faced through the testimony, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't shown any emotion when I confronted her about the test weeks ago, and she wasn't about to show any now, but I could see the cracks forming. She was losing her grip on everything. Next came the financial evidence. This was where things really started to unravel for Amanda. Mary Ellen had prepared a detailed presentation, complete with charts, bank statements, and emails, many of which Ethan had helped us recover. She laid it all out for the court. The fake businesses, the shell companies, the offshore accounts. It was a tangled web of deception, and Amanda was at the center of it. For the past 2 years, Mary Ellen said, standing in front of the jury, Amanda Bennett, in collaboration with Mark Hudson, has systematically stolen from my client. They funneled money out of Bennett Acres, hiding it in fake real estate deals, all while pretending to support Mr. Bennett in the management of his business. Christine tried to object, claiming that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof linking Amanda to the fraud. But Mary Ellen had anticipated this. She had prepared a devastating final piece of evidence, an email chain between Amanda and Mark, explicitly discussing how to hide the money. As you can see here, Mary Ellen said, pointing to the large screen where the emails were displayed, Amanda Bennett instructs Mark Hudson on how to transfer funds from the Bennett Acres account into a shell company under the name Prairie Investments, which was later revealed to be a fraudulent entity with no real assets. This is direct evidence of her involvement in the fraud. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, just when we thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Mark Hudson walked into the courtroom. I couldn't believe my eyes. He looked disheveled, thinner than I remembered, with a nervous energy about him. There were gasps from the audience, and the judge had to call for order as the room erupted in whispers. Mark hadn't been seen in weeks. The police had been searching for him, and most people assumed he was either hiding or worse. But here he was, walking into the courtroom as if nothing had happened. Your Honor, Christine said, standing up quickly, we would like to call Mark Hudson to the stand. The judge allowed it, and Mark was sworn in. His appearance changed everything. Mark looked around the room, his eyes landing on Amanda for just a moment before he looked down at the floor. He hesitated before speaking, but when he finally did, the courtroom went silent. I'm here to tell the truth, Mark said, his voice shaking. I can't keep running. Amanda and I, we did it. We stole the money. We thought we could get away with it. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. I stared at Mark, trying to process what was happening. He had come back not to defend himself or Amanda, but to confess. Mark continued, his eyes flicking nervously toward Amanda, who now looked pale and tense, her composed mask cracking under the weight of his words. It started about 2 years ago, Mark explained, his voice faltering at times. Amanda approached me with a plan. She knew how much control she had over the farm's finances after she married Tom. We started shifting small amounts of money, just a few thousand at first, into accounts that we set up under fake business names. We figured it would be easy to hide, that no one would notice. And for a while, no one did. Mary Ellen, who had been sitting calmly through Mark's testimony, now stood up. Mr. Hudson, can you clarify for the court how these accounts were set up and what role Amanda Bennett played in the fraud? Mark nodded, swallowing hard before answering. She was the one who set everything up. She handled all the paperwork, opened the shell companies. I just followed her lead. She knew how to move the money without raising any red flags. We even had help from this guy, Jeffrey Carr, who was an old contact of Amanda's from her time as a financial advisor in Denver. Jeffrey Carr. The name had come up before in Ethan's search through Amanda's emails, but hearing it spoken out loud in court made it all feel more real. Amanda had been weaving a tangled web long before she ever married me. I didn't think it would get this bad, Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper now. When the investigation started and people began asking questions, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Amanda said we could just ride it out, that the courts wouldn't dig deep enough to find the truth. But I couldn't take it anymore. So I ran. Where have you been? Christine Bennett, Amanda's lawyer, asked. And why come back now? Mark rubbed his hands together nervously. I went to a friend's place in Kansas City. I thought I could lie low until things blew over, but I couldn't live with it anymore. I couldn't keep running from this. Tom doesn't deserve this. None of this was his fault. He turned to look at me then, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of the man who had once been my friend. I'm sorry, Tom, he said, his voice breaking. I betrayed you. I didn't mean for things to get this far. I didn't know what to say. The anger I had felt toward Mark for months was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, pity. He was just as trapped in Amanda's schemes as I had been, and now he was paying the price. With Mark's confession, the case took a dramatic turn. Mary Ellen wasted no time incorporating his testimony into our argument. Over the next few hours, she presented the full picture to the court. Amanda's infidelity, the DNA test proving that Matthew wasn't my son, and now Mark's admission of guilt in the financial crimes. The jury had heard enough. Christine tried to salvage what she could, but the damage was too severe. Amanda's cold, detached demeanor had turned the jury against her long before Mark's confession, and now with everything out in the open, there was no way she could spin the narrative in her favor. The final verdict came the next morning, on May 18, 2022. The courtroom was packed with people, reporters lining the back walls, and the tension was palpable as the jury filed back in. I sat next to Mary Ellen, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced over at Ethan, who was sitting with his head down, his hands clenched into fists. He had done so much to help me get to this moment, and I knew he was feeling the weight of it all. Judge Timothy Hayes asked the jury foreman to read the verdict. In the matter of Bennett versus Bennett, regarding the claims of financial fraud and embezzlement, we, the jury, find the defendant, Amanda Bennett, guilty on all charges. There was a collective gasp in the courtroom, followed by murmurs that spread like wildfire through the audience. Amanda sat frozen, her face drained of color, as if she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Christine leaned over to speak to her, but Amanda didn't respond. It was over, and she knew it. Judge Hayes banged his gavel, calling for order. He looked down at Amanda with a mixture of disappointment and finality. Amanda Bennett, you have been found guilty of serious financial crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The court hereby sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. 12 years. The weight of the sentence hung in the air as Amanda was led away in handcuffs, her face blank and emotionless. She had lost everything, her freedom, her reputation, and the future she had tried to steal from me. After the verdict, I walked outside the courthouse, the sun shining brightly over downtown Kearney. The crowds were still buzzing with the news, but I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was finally over. Amanda's grip on my life, my business, my legacy, it was all gone. Ethan joined me on the courthouse steps, standing next to me in silence for a few moments before speaking. "Are you okay, Tom?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how I felt. Relief? Sadness? Bitterness? Maybe a little of everything. "I don't know, kid," I said after a long pause. "But I'm glad it's over." Ethan looked up at me, his expression serious. "I'm sorry for everything my mom did. If I had known sooner." I shook my head, cutting him off. "You don't need to apologize. You've done more for me than you'll ever know, Ethan. You're a good kid, and you've got your whole life ahead of you." He smiled faintly, but I could see the weight of his mother's actions still hung on him. He'd been through more than most 14-year-olds ever should, but I knew he'd come out stronger because of it. In the weeks that followed, the story of Amanda's downfall spread far beyond Kearney. The local papers covered every detail, from the trial to Mark's confession to Amanda's sentencing. People who had once whispered behind my back now treated me with sympathy, as though I was the victim of a cruel plot. And in a way, I was. Mark's confession had saved me in the end. He had returned with the evidence we needed to expose Amanda's lies and bring her to justice. I hadn't expected to forgive him, but as the days passed, I found myself letting go of the anger. He had been a pawn in Amanda's game, just like I had, and in the end, he had done the right thing. Bennett Acres was still mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. The land was thriving, the crops were strong, and my future felt solid once more. I had a lot of rebuilding to do, my reputation, my relationships with my business partners, but I knew I could do it. Ethan and I kept in touch. He moved back to Denver to live with his father, but we talked often, and he visited the farm a few times during the summer. He was doing well in school, and I was proud of the man he was becoming. In many ways, he was the silver lining in all of this, a reminder that good could come from even the darkest times. As for Matthew, I had no idea what the future held for him. He was just a baby, unaware of the chaos that had surrounded his birth. I made the decision to stay in his life, even though he wasn't biologically mine. He deserved better than the mess Amanda had created, and I intended to make sure he got it. Life moved on. The seasons changed, and the farm kept growing, just like it always had. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face it. I had my land, my legacy, and my life back, and that was all that mattered. If you like the story, don't hesitate to subscribe and listen to new stories every day. Write in the comments what you like the most.